Okay, I'm going to run these two today. These are older Jonsereds. One of them is kind of rare, although for whatever reason I've got two of them. One's a 451E, and this is kind of like the last of their metal saws, kind of in the same time frame as the 70E I have in the truck and in that generation. I'm going to say this is kind of a transition saw to 455, and starts having partner influence with the way the handle is, the anti-vibe and stuff like that. Good running little saw. Got that from Bob years and years and years ago, back around 2011, I think. It used to ride in my tractor, and I had done a few things to it to make it a little snappier back then when that was important to me. Then I lent it to a log buyer. Guy used to work for one of the companies I used to sell logs to back then, and he used it for a trim saw, you know, in his truck when he was trimming up logs to put on the truck to bring to the mill. And then at the mill, and he got out of the logging business and moved to Florida and gave them to another friend of mine who's a log buyer, who turned around and gave it back. Said, hey, these were ones that log buyer number one wanted you to have. And of course, this one here came from him, I believe, directly. And this one came to him through me, from Bob, back to me. Either way, they're good running little saws, and they deserve some run time. Today is a perfect day to do that. So, a couple little features. One of the things I found interesting is when they got to these were a little inconvenient to work with. These were still pretty convenient, for that matter, actually very much so, with this external sprocket. I think I showed that before. You know, very cool little saw right there. A couple things way ahead of its time. It does have anti-vibe, Jonsered style, and it's all metal. That's magnesium. Has internal clutch, external sprocket, small mount. The chain adjuster on this one is right down in there, which is not my favorite place. But when I turn it on its side, you know, the caps and stuff like that are accessible. Now, you also have to remember this was in the time frame where both the bar oil and the fuel were still in the cases, right? You can see that. Later designs pioneered by Husky, they separated the gas tank into the handle, the tank handle with the 61s and some of those Huskies I was running before. Let me see if I've got one. Yeah, look at that. There's a 1978 built saw. Bar oil is in the case, but the gas is in the handle, tank handle. And that basic layout that Husqvarna developed back then is still the way saws are today. And of course that was sold during the same period of time these were on the market as well. Same basic generation. 154 is also that earlier generation with that layout as well. And it's a little discussion, I suppose. One of the enemies of reliable horsepower on two-strokes, especially from this era, was heat. You start making more horsepower, you know, it's like the big trucks. You have to have enough radiator to manage the heat, so that in the service cycles and service situations they're in, there's enough of a cooling system to keep this all alive. And again, with more horsepower and more heat, things like the cases started getting warmer. So a saw like that was more prone to having, you know, a vapor lock type thing, because the gas got all heated up in the case. And that's not a good thing. So when they separated it out, now you're having a little higher level of heat management relative to the overall package of the saw. In that particular case, the gas tank itself. Of course, with these, they have the blocks where you have a screw going through the carburetor into the cylinder, and that used to transmit heat out to the carburetor. And in the 90s, actually Jonsereds started it sooner, the 670s and stuff like that, had a rubber boot which would isolate the carburetor from the cylinder so it wasn't getting the heat directly through the manifold or the mounting parts of the manifold, which is another discussion. But the thing is that a lot of that stuff was developed back 70s into 80s. By the time the 90s came around, you know, Steel had some really super designs, and of course Husky had their famous 371, 372 series. But the basic layout, you can see the evolution of the layouts right here. Actually, another two saws I'll throw in here. And this is my favorite Husky of that era, L77. And like that Jonsered 451E, it's got really limited anti-vibe on that handle, separated from the case. And of course it has the bar oil gas in the same case like that Jonsered does. Very light, compact package, well thought out. And that cylinder design went from the A's, A77, all the way up through the 480. So it had a long life because it made good power. They got heavier, more complex, but the basic package, the basic power output of that saw was quite good. And it was reliable, obviously, because there it is. But yet again, you know, heat management kind of mitigated how much power they could put out in that package and still manage not having the gas boil and saw overheat and stuff like that in tough conditions. That really was the limiting factor in terms of horsepower. It wasn't they didn't know how to make more, but they had the size, the power output to the package, including the cooling. 800-pound gorilla. Something that is totally missed on the saw mod people. More, but you also have to think about cooling as well if you want them to actually survive in a work environment. Of course, this was typical of the American saws, McCulloch. Instead of having a vertical cylinder like the Husky has, it's got a horizontal layout. You know, this was a piston port. A lot of these were reed valves, the Homolites. And that was what they brought to the table when the Swedes were doing things like this. And of course, when this class of design came out, the Americans were done. I hate to put it that way, but they really were. I mean, there was no competing with this. Husky was so far ahead of their time. And Steel responded, the old 38s and stuff like that, but Husky was really ahead of their time. But back to these guys, Jonsered was sort of in there. They were pretty innovative. And this was before they got sucked up into the whole Electrolux thing. I guess this saw right here was right at the beginning of that era. Kind of a transitional thing. But I believe that's a true Jonsered right there. Either way, there's some saw history. And I want to run these. That's where we started. That's where I want to finish. Get a little run time on these. So this is actually the third attempt at doing this very same video with those very same saws. For one reason or the other, I wasn't able to get the video to either record or something to where it was not useful. I might have some clips around, but this is the typical task of the day, of which I've got a bunch down there as well, just pretty much all around the farm. Typical springtime activities after winter and wind. This Bauer pole saw has already got several hours of time on it, and it's a $90 purchase when you include the battery. And I originally just wanted to see if it was useful, can cut down a couple of branches around the fence, and it's now proven to be very useful. And since I've got a lot of those batteries, because I have a bunch of the other tools like the hand grinder and the reciprocating saw and impact drivers and stuff like that, it was sort of a natural progression for me to see whether or not it would do anything, and it has an Oregon bar and chain. That's all it needs right there, right? So let me do the saw start race at some point, see which ones want to fire off and which ones don't. I'm just going to cut it back to the fence, and I've got to move on. I'll come back later in the afternoon to do the next one. Let me see if I can get this one cut up with these saws. You'd think with all those 4 saws, that should be a no-brainer, right? Well, when you get into these vintage saws, that's never a guarantee. I always keep a couple of new ones around just for that insurance policy. But anyway. Alright, I'll just set it up and let it run. See, one of the things that happened was on the last time I did this, I thought I was recording. And when I put the camera into this stand, I must have hit the record button again because it's kind of awkward. And it didn't record. So I got nothing. So I'm looking right at it now. I see that it's recording something. So start out with the easiest saw to start that I've got. Well, you may or may not be able to tell, but this thing here, this is a very handy tool right here. Next is this little 455, and it's got a little short Oregon Bauer. But let's see if it'll start before we get excited about it. Well, as you can tell, this saw runs quite well. Let's see if it restarts, because if it does, this one here has earned a spot in the truck. I have very rarely had a saw just fire off on the first pull. That's not a usual scenario. All right, let's move on to the next one. See how easy it is to start that. This one doesn't have the sophistication of that 455. Yeah. As this is that older design, and instead of having the throttle high idle lock on the carburetor linkage, it's right here. Look at old Homelite. So it's not quite as sophisticated. Let's see if it'll fire. probably could use a little bit better chain, and obviously got to raise the idle a little bit. But let's get a couple more cuts of that one and then see if the 61 will run. It needs a little bit of screwdriver time, so I will take it out of its pain and see if I can get the 61 to fire. Now this one too, period, got your choke, but it's got the high idle in the handle right there. You pull up the trigger, you pull that back. And let's see if it'll fire. Now that's cherry right there, and it's borderline hard, but that's not bad for a saw built in 1978, is it? Yeah, I'm going to have to come back with a peavey to break that loose. Can't argue with this saw right here. It's a good running saw for any year, right? But well, I hope I have enough here to put together a little video kind of showing the state of some of my vintage saws right now. And I'm pretty sure that this one here I'm going to develop further. Again, I had run this a couple years back, I actually fell in. You know, it's that good a saw. Then I had the 451E running pretty good, but I have to get back on that again. It's obviously got a little bit on the lean side, fuel starvation type things. And with my new parameters of what I can and cannot do, I can't push this log over. I have to go get a tool, like a tractor or a peavey. So anyway, hopefully that's enough for a short video. You know, that pole saw from Harbor Freight, Bauer brand, that's a surprise. That thing works pretty good. I figured, you know, I had the 40 volt Oregon system, right? That's only a 20 volt system. And I also have the Husqvarna 36 volt system. And I could have a stack of those batteries for a fraction of the cost of those other two saws and get just about the same kind of work done. So we'll see how long it lasts. This is job number 3. Actually, it's 4. I trimmed up a yard tree in 2 like this, and then a bunch of brush. That's the 4th time I've had it out. And I was using the 3 amp hour battery. A 5 amp hour battery would go quite a bit longer, right? But for this kind of work, it works beautifully. You know, have a bag full of batteries charged. I have a charger in the truck, you know. So fence line repair, clearing like this, that is an excellent option. And this is beautiful firewood. Wow, this is nice firewood. So I got to roll this log, nip it off, take the tractor, and I'm going to start a landing right across the field there where Bob and I were working before. Start stacking the firewood right there for the next winter. So anyway, that's it for me. Talk to you later. Bye for now. Hopefully I got a video. So that's the whole point on this. You know, the whole point of this is you can have these old vintage saws, and as long as the tasks are of this class, you can go out and have fun with those things, get something done. You're not going to depend on them for like a tree service or logging, that's for sure. But from the hobby perspective, if you like the old saws like I do, this is the period of time during a typical year where I don't have to think production. You know, I can think having fun with my saws and doing little jobs like this, because I got a lot of them. So anyway, that's it for today.